New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth, to live a conscious life, to live a conscious life on the growing edge, on the growing edge.
And now, here's Allie.
Hello and welcome to Growing Edge Live. I'm Allie Benjamin, and it is my absolute joy to be here today with you, whether you're here for the first time, and if you are, I'm so glad that you found us. And if you're back again, welcome back. So glad that you're here and all of us are creating this together. So I'm Allie Benjamin, and I've been doing this podcast now for 2.5 years, and we're coming to the end of the year. And I'm just feeling really grateful for all the guests that have joined me throughout this year and for the last couple of years. And I'm excited today, as usual, to invite a really dear friend of mine to the show. For those of you that haven't tuned in before, I have conversations with individuals, creatives, people that are channeling their time, their talent, their energy, their resources, their creativity, and their love into doing good works in the world. So we talk about the good news. We go deep into people's lives to find out how they got to be who they are and how they got inspired to be doing the work that they're doing in the world. And so again, welcome. I'm glad you're here. And thank you to New Thought Media Network for producing our show, and the Satya Center for sponsoring. And if you'd like to support this ministry, you can find us at growingedgelive.com. So my guest today, I met several years ago, Cindy Grimes, Reverend Cindy, and I'm going to read a little bit about her. She is a lifelong peace builder and spiritual director of the Center for Spiritual Living in Ocala, Florida. She develops transformative programs rooted in social, emotional literacy, there she is, trauma-informed care, restorative practices, and universal spiritual principles. Cindy co-founded Circle Up Center for Practical Peace Building and facilitates peace building training with the River Phoenix Center for Peace Building. A wife, mother, and grandmother, she brings warmth, humor, and deep spiritual insight to her work. Her TEDx talk, titled "Kindness is the Cure," continues to inspire I'm having a tongue-twisting time this morning. It globally inspires globally. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you, Allie, for that beautiful welcome. I'm so excited to see you and to be on the podcast. It's been a while since I did a podcast, actually. You know, during the pandemic, that's all we were doing, and I haven't done one for a bit. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. We met years ago at the Big Sky Retreat in Big Sky, Montana, where we had a lot of friends in common. And that retreat was really a deep dive and such an adventure being out in the mountains. I have fond memories of that time and meeting you and a lot of your spiritual community that you brought with you.
Yes, yeah. I loved Big Sky. I miss it.
I know. Well, there's another retreat that Charles Geddes is doing, Spirit in the Desert, I think it's called, in Phoenix in May or March. So I don't know if you've heard about that, but I'm going to go to that one this year.
Wonderful. Yeah. I think I may add that to my repertoire.
Yeah, cool. So I'd love to get to know your background a little bit, and I'd love you to share your story with our guests. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about your upbringing? Where were you born? What was your family dynamic like? And who were you as a young one?
Okay, sure. So I was born in New York City, in the Bronx, and I am the oldest child. Big, loud Latin family. And I went to Catholic school when I was a little girl. And it was a place where I felt a lot of peace. You know, I would go into the sanctuary and feel like, oh my gosh, this is just the most wonderful thing. And I remember thinking, you know, and I love the nuns. And I thought, what an amazing thing it would be to be a nun and be married to God. Like, you know, I don't know where I got that from. There was nobody else in my family that was religious like that. And so, you know, I had that idea when I was a little girl. And then I found out that there were priests. And I thought, well, geez, I'm not sure I want to be a nun. Maybe I want to be a priest. Well, that's not a thing for little Catholic girls. So that was, you know, kind of the beginning. And as I said, I'm the oldest child. And when I was 8 years old, we moved from New York City to the suburbs out on Long Island. And I was just, as I was listening to one of your other guests, I was kind of reminiscing and thinking about what that was when we moved from the city to Long Island. And there were, I mean, the houses are next to each other. You can see your neighbors. But my mother cried for probably a month because my dad had moved her to the sticks. And we needed a car to get everywhere, you know, like you didn't have mass transit and all of that. So, yeah, so we moved to Long Island. And then my mother had been in foster care when she was a child. So she always had this idea that she wanted to take care of foster children and wanted a bunch of kids. And, you know, there was me and my brother, and my dad said, well, if you want more kids, you're having them by yourself. Because he came from, it was the opposite for him. He had a huge family. Like he was one of 13 kids. So I guess the compromise then was for them to take in foster children. And that's what they did. So first kids we brought into our house, I was 8 or 9 years old. And I remember bringing my sister home. She was the first one. And we ended up adopting 2 of these kids that were foster children in our home. And she had a broken leg. She was a year and a half. And it was a spiral fracture, if you know what that means, you know, of the femur, right? So the thigh, which means that somebody literally did this and snapped it. She had cigarette burns in her skin, patches of hair that were missing. It was just horrific. And this was back in the day when we didn't have car seats and all of that. And I was the oldest, you know, here I am, 8, 9 years old. I think I was 8. Anyway, I'm holding her in the car, and she wasn't speaking. I think she peed through her diaper. I was like, oh my God, what is this? And to think of what kind of people would do something like this to a child, you know? So there was her, and then she had a half brother, and he came into our home when he was just 9 days old. And so we raised those 2. And then there were a couple of other kids that came into our world at that time. But that was like one of the really early experiences that kind of shaped me. I didn't even realize how much trauma there was with all of that in my world until just a few years ago. Because you just, you know, it was just life, right? It was just, you know, what it was for us. I didn't know any different, you know. And then there were other things. It was fairly dysfunctional, you know, at that time. There were not classes, parenting classes. There wasn't a lot of oversight or any of that. And so, you know, my dad grew up in a violent home. My mother had grown up in foster care, and they did the best they could, but it was kind of messed up. It was messed up, and there were reverberations from that, you know, experience throughout the rest of my life.
How did that impact your family dynamic, you and your brother with your parents, and then to have these 2 little ones come in that obviously had a lot of trauma and a lot of issues, I'm imagining. How did
Yeah.
that affect you all?
It was rough. I mean, at one point we went from just me and my brother to those two children, and then there were two others. So all of a sudden, there's six kids in our house, and my parents, and I resented it. I resented it a little bit because now I have to share my room. There was another set of children, a brother sister team that came to our house, and she was just a little bit younger than me. So I was like, 9, let's say, and she was about 7. And she came in and climbed up the tree in our backyard, the apple tree. And my dad, who was a police officer, my dad was like big, strong, very patriarchal Latin kind of man, right? And he says to this little girl, "Come on down from the tree." And she said, "F you." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, who is this monster in my house?" And those poor kids, they had, it was so much trauma those kids had. And I didn't know the backstory for these kids, but I thought whatever thing must have happened to them must have been really bad for them to have to live in our house. So it was kind of a love-hate thing. I was the oldest, so I was very concerned about everybody's well-being, and I was very much in that role. And when it was time for those two to go home to their mother, I was devastated.
Mm.
So, because I thought, what change has happened in their home that now these kids can go back to that? Like, I wasn't convinced that they were going to be okay. And then, one day they were gone, and that was it. We never heard anything else. But that was kind of, I guess, the way the system was back then. Like, just, we were there as a shelter, a temporary shelter for them, and then that time was up and they were gone.
Wow, not having experienced foster children, or in my world, in my life, in my family, nobody has adopted anyone or taken anyone in. But from my perspective as a minister and someone that's been seen, supported, I just went to a fundraiser on Friday for Christmas Box House, which is a shelter for children that have nowhere to go and their parents can't care for them. So it's very much in my awareness. But hearing it from you as a child in a home where the parents decide to bring children in, I'm wondering, wow, it seems like such a worthy thing, like such a wonderful thing to take a child in and rescue them and give them support. But as I'm hearing it from a 9-year-old's viewpoint, it sounds like it was a trauma for you in a way, having the exposure to this level of trauma. And I can see how it's influenced you growing up and becoming an adult and the things you're interested in. But at the time, that must have been really hard as a child, seeing your parents make a decision that impacted you so much.
Well, they didn't ask us.
Yeah.
It was a decision they made, and I didn't know, or I didn't have any option about it. So, it was just our lives. And, we did have a very big family. And I like to joke that my family is kind of like, if you've ever seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding, it's a family like that. Like, everybody's in everybody's business, everybody knows everybody's stuff, like all of that. But then there was also another aspect to it. As I said, my dad grew up in a really violent household, but that was just the way it was. When they did discipline, it was physical discipline, and it was swift, and it was, no questions asked. So that was another layer on top of that. Like, these kids were traumatized, we were all traumatized, but the only way they knew how to do discipline was physical discipline. So it was tough. There was a lot of trauma, and again, I didn't realize. You just push that stuff down, and you
Right.
go on with life as it is. And, this is, just how it is. And I thought that kind of everybody's family was like that. I didn't realize until I got out of the situation, what it was. But the other aspect of the family, we're my big fat Greek wedding, but we're also kind of like the Godfather family. If you've seen that movie, that there's the Godfather of Don, right, Don Corleone, and then there his sons, and my dad, though he was one of 13, and he was on the one of the younger ones, he was the enforcer, and he was a police officer. So if one of my cousins stepped out of line for a while or something, my aunt or whatever, the single moms would call my dad and say, okay, I need you to, tune up so-and-so because he's stepping out of line. So that was kind of my dad's role in all of that. So it was a really colorful and interesting family and way to grow up
Yeah,
that, had a lot of impact.
definitely. So was there someone in this whole mix of people and large family that was a positive, like a soft place to fall? How did you get comfort? Was there someone in your life that played that role or inspired you to do it differently?
I would say my safe place was school.
Mm.
After we left the Bronx and went to Long Island, we had a really great school system, and I was a really good student. So I had wonderful teachers, and I excelled academically. So that was a thing that I could always like kind of fall back on. That was the place where I would shine. I was also like the overweight kid, and then brown skinned girl. It was like I never felt like I fit in anywhere.
Mm.
My parents were both born in Puerto Rico, but I was born in New York City. So, I'm what you call a New Yorican. And years later, I'm 18 years old. I go to Puerto Rico and I say, call myself Puerto Rican. And they said, no, honey, you're not Puerto Rican, you're American. And I'm like, oh my gosh, well, I don't belong here. I don't belong there. And then I'm the fat girl and I'm smart. And I just like never felt like I fit in anywhere. It was really kind of lonely, but school was my solace because I was a good student and I loved reading. And I had an uncle that was into metaphysics, and everyone thought he was the weird one, because he wasn't in the Catholic tradition. But he lent me a book. And back then, you couldn't find books. There was no Amazon. There was, we didn't have the big Barnes and Nobles. To find these metaphysical books, you had to go into these dark corners and bookstores way deep, far away from people. Anyway, it was Edgar Cayce. And I think it was first his autobiography. But anyway, I took like a deep dive into that. And then I got really interested in all these other kind of metaphysical things and the idea of reincarnation and altered states of consciousness and all of this stuff that I was reading when I was like 13, 14 years old, while all the other kids are chasing boys and doing whatever. I was reading these books that were like expanding my mind, but there was really nobody in my family that I could talk to about this stuff.
So your uncle, did you talk to him or you just took his?
A little bit. Yeah. But again, everybody just thought he was weird. So I kept it all kind of under wraps.
Yeah. So you, at one point, you looked to the nuns and the priests and thought that would be something of interest to you. You get exposed to metaphysics and sort of take a deep dive into alternative sort of spirituality. Where as a teenager and a young adult, how did that blossom?
So I would say, there are those like defining moments, things that happen in your life. And so I had a couple of defining moments around spirituality in church when I was a kid. The first one was, I was younger, I was maybe 8 years old. And if you know Catholicism, you go through these different can't remember the name now. It's been so long, but they're like rites of passage, right? So communion was the first one. And so I remember the nuns getting us ready. You know, you're going to do your first communion. And before that, you have to confess to the priest your sins. And the priest would give you, you know, these prayers that you would have to do, and then you would be absolved of your sins. And I thought, well, that doesn't make any sense. I talk to God directly. I don't need anybody in between to mediate for me, you know? So I'm talking to all my little friends and saying, we need to go to the principal or something because they're not teaching us right. Like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm going to start a little revolution here. And nobody else cared, you know, of course. But I just thought it was so strange. Like, why would I have to talk to this man? And he's going to tell me, I talk to God myself. I don't need this person in between. Plus, what am I going to confess? So I hit my brother. I lied about something. I mean, you know, I don't know. There's only so many things an 8-year-old, you know, is doing that's so sinful that you have to confess it. So that was one like chink, you know, like, oh, something's not right here. Mm. And then it's around 13, 14, you do confirmation. And I was learning world history, and I remember learning about the Inquisition and horrors that were done to Native people and stuff in the name of religion. And I was horrified. I was like, I can't believe this is happening in the name of, you know, like Jesus. And what I had been taught, you know, was the way, right? The way, the truth, the light, all of that. And so, and also Gandhi. I learned about Gandhi, and I thought, wow, amazing. So I go to my catechism teacher and I asked her, I said, did Gandhi go to heaven? Because Gandhi's not Catholic. Mm-hmm. And she said to me, if one knows of the one true faith and turns from it, they're not welcome in the kingdom. Oh. And I thought, well, I guess this is not for me. Because if Gandhi didn't get into heaven, there is no way I'm getting in. And so, you know, that kind of started shutting things down for me in terms of religion and spirituality, although I always felt like I kind of had my own relationship with God. So then fast forward to college, you know, I was a biology and psychology major with the idea that I would go to medical school and become an MD. Now, I didn't want to treat sick people. What I wanted to do was explore the mind-body connection. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I needed those letters next to my name so that people would recognize what I was doing and there would be some authority behind it and blah, blah, blah. And then I had this sense as I was learning the science behind it, like, oh my gosh, I think we're all talking about the same thing. We're just using different words for what we're describing here, this thing we call God, you know? So, so that kind of, you know, opened the door again to some inquiry, but I still wasn't looking for a church because, you know, it just didn't feel like I'm not going to find my answers there. You know?
Yeah. So that was in college. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So then you married, you had children.
So, okay. So my family moved then from New York. My parents moved from New York, from Long Island to when my mom was crying about being in the boonies on Long Island. Well, then they moved down to Florida and bought a like rural area. They bought a small farm and they had horses and cows. And, you know, I was in college in New York and loving the single life and, you know, had this idea of going to med school. And then I got an F in physics, which was like, you don't get into medical school with an F in physics. And so I came home. I came to Florida, which never thought I was going to live there. I was never going to stay. I hated everything about it. I went from living at a, you know, college campus to I wake up in the morning and I'm looking out the window and there's a cow staring back at me and no people and nobody that looks like me. It was, wow. So, yeah, so what happened then? Let's see. I thought I would take a couple of years and maybe like go back to school and because I'd had my degree by then, but I still wanted to go to med school. And so I would take physics over again and then reapply and stuff. And in the meantime, I met somebody. In fact, I was interviewing at an osteopathic school in Chicago. And at this time now, I'm working at this point, I was working in social work. I was a victim advocate with the state attorney's office. So here's, the thread then, right, from childhood that I didn't even realize, right? This was just something I was going to do for a little bit till I got to my real thing, which was to go to med school. But no, I ended up working in the state attorney's office, and I was working with crime victims. So it was sexual assault, domestic violence, child abuse, like all of that stuff, a deep dive into that. Not exactly frontline, because I wasn't going into people's homes then, but I was seeing the pictures, hearing the stories, all of that. And one day I'm just, walking through the hallway, and I see this tall, good looking man. And I remember looking down and noticing there was no ring on his finger. I'm like, and we smile at each other, and that was nice. Hello, how are you doing? And then the next weekend we met at a party, and it was like, oh, haven't we met before? Yeah, we met at the, state attorney's office and whatever. And so we hit it off. And the next week, I think, or 2 weeks later, I had the interview in Chicago. And I remember telling the young lady who was taking me around, showing me around, I said, I met this guy, and I don't know, there's something maybe there, something clicked, and I'm not so sure about this whole thing anymore. Well, that was it. I found love. I didn't need medical school. He was, a police officer as well, like my dad. So, checked off a few boxes there. And, we were kind of inseparable after that. And I didn't end up getting in anyway. So, so that whole thing took a back seat. But I did stay in the social services. Grady and I ended up getting married a year later. I stayed in the social work arena. So I did the state attorney's office. I went to frontline work, after he and I married, and I actually worked for Department of Children and Families, when the abuse hotline those calls, and somebody has to go out there to the house and do the investigation. I did that. And that was quite an awakening for me, to see how people lived, and then to start to learn the dynamics of abuse and things, and realize, oh my gosh, my home growing up was kind of dysfunctional. I'd never, even though I was in it, I didn't know until I got out of it, and realized looking back, like, wow, there was some messed up stuff there. And then I had a case, a child that just pushed me over the edge. And I thought, I can't do this work anymore. I couldn't separate my life from what was going on with this kid. And I couldn't get the kid to tell me what actually had happened in her home. And so I left that position. I left that job. And then I went from that to hospice work. So people said, you went from the frying pan into the fire. So that I did death, I did abuse and neglect, and then I went to death and dying. And that was another incredible faith building kind of a thing.
Wow.
Yeah. It was crazy. Yeah. And in the meantime, I get introduced to Unity. And I was like, wow, no, this is different. This is really different. The first time I heard Father, Mother, God, I was afraid to walk out of the building. I thought, I'm going to get hit by lightning or something, because I can't believe these people are saying this stuff. It resonated. And then, Grady and I had in fact, the week I got the job in hospice, I found out I was pregnant with my first child. I wasn't even sure that my insurance was going to cover it. Like, they would think it was a pre-existing condition. And so I had all of that stuff going. My belly's growing. I'm carrying new life as I'm talking to people that are at the end of theirs. And that was a whole mind-blowing thing for me. So yeah, those are some of the bricks, some of the building. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a short break and we'll come back and we'll pick up where we leave off right now.
Okay, sure thing.
Okay.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hefferland Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Kitchener, Unity Spiritual Center Ottawa, Om Center for Spiritual Living, Satya Center, Begin Within Ministries, Center for Spiritual Living North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and the Center for Spiritual Living Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for being part of the New Thought Media Network. Please like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth. To live a conscious life, to live a conscious life on the growing edge. On the growing edge.
And now, here's Allie.
And we're back with Cindy. So here you are pregnant. You're trying to figure out what to do next. I'm sure after all of these, hospice is that must be an uncomfortable fit for someone that's carrying new life. So what happened after once you got pregnant, and did you stay with hospice or did you?
I did. It was great actually, because my husband worked nights and I was able to work from home, and my patients were wonderful, and I was learning so much. I mean, it was, like I said, really faith building. When people are at the end of their lives, the veil is thin, and I would experience miracle after miracle after miracle. I saw people die what I would call good deaths. I saw bad deaths. It was just, it was really foundational for me, and realizing, how do I want to live my life? I don't want to be at the end of my journey with regrets. And so I really started, putting my priorities in order. And so there was a point where so now we have 3 kids. I've worked hospice and we have 3 kids, and I don't want somebody else raising my kids. I don't want to pay for daycare and have somebody else hear their first words or their first steps. And so I started looking for a business that I could work from home. And I started a parenting magazine. So I took a whole shift from doing social services to now I'm an entrepreneur. And the parenting magazine again, there's that thread of being a resource for parents and families.
Mhm.
Because if we could show people community and give them free things to do around town and things like that, their family life is going to be better. They're not going to be beating their children. We're going to give them alternatives. So I did that for 11 years, and in the meantime, I left Unity. I jumped right in with both feet into Unity, and unfortunately, there was a point where you get the back door a little bit. You kind of see what's happening behind the scenes, and the minister would say things and that were not flattering about members of the congregation, and it didn't feel good. It was like, this is not how it's supposed to be. So I left, and I was heartbroken to have to leave that community. And then I went to it wasn't Pentecostal, but just a different than what I grew up in church. It was very lively. It was more like a mega church. And I loved it. I loved the music, but it was still like this old, tired message. And every once in a while, they'd bring in a guest speaker. They'd speak in tongues, or they'd do some stuff I felt like was not authentic again.
Mm.
And so I ended up leaving there. Oh, the big thing was when they told my children that they needed to speak in tongues or they were not in the spirit. And my kids said, "Mom, I don't understand. They want me to talk gibberish, and I don't." So I was like, mm-mm. So anyway, left that church, still feeling like, oh my gosh, I wish I could find a spiritual home. And I was looking for articles on spiritual parenting for the magazine. And I found this place called, at the time it was Oak Brook Life Enrichment Center. And they were teaching a values curriculum. And I thought, now that's neat. Maybe I can find someone to write for the magazine about these values and whatever they're teaching the kids. And so I came to where I am now today. It's now called Center for Spiritual Living Ocala. And I was, again, blown away. Reverend Peggy Hostetler, Reverend Dr. Peggy was the minister at that time. And I had not seen a woman in the pulpit. The first talk I heard, I think she mentioned Star Wars and Buddha and Jesus. And I was like, oh my God, what is this place? This is cool. And again, jumped in with both feet and like, I have to get more of this. And I started volunteering and helping out and taking classes and so many things. Another turning point. It was 2003 or 2004. 3 hurricanes blew through Florida, back to back to back. And at this time, my husband and I were not in a great space. We were like right on the verge of divorce and living in with our 3 children, like 2 separate parents, but under the same roof. It felt like that. And so everything was falling apart. And I was learning these new principles again. I was kind of back in the flow with community and stuff. And I started learning, these different ideas and to get out of the whole victim mode. And so I started using the teachings in real time in my life. Everything started turning around, one thing after another after another. The other thing was I was 100 pounds. By this time, I'm 100 pounds overweight. And I ended up having an episode and going to the hospital in an ambulance and people telling me, this is your wake-up call. This is your wake-up call. This is your wake-up call. Okay, God help me, please. And again, you applying the teachings, things started to turn around. We were on the verge of losing our house. We were able to keep that. I was losing the business. That turned around. Everything. And my husband and I are together still, 37 years later, like we got through that hump. But the teachings, it worked. When you work it, it works. And I proved it for myself. And so, when you see a great movie, you have a great meal in a restaurant, you want to share it with everybody. And so I thought I just got to share this with everybody. And Reverend Peggy just kind of nurtured me. I think she saw something in me, and encouraged me to take the classes. And before I knew it, I was in practitioner classes, and then it was like, okay, take the next leap to, to become a minister. And so,
Wow. It seems like your childhood, all of the different careers that you had along the way have really led you to be such a rich resource in ministry, in spiritual community. So how do you weave all of this together to, because as we know, you are the spiritual director there now. So what can someone expect when they come to your center? What is it you're looking for? How do what's important as far as building community and being a resource?
Well, the first thing, I think when I found this center, I found a safe place. So I could start unraveling, some of that trauma and things that I had been through. And what Peggy and I did was kind of unusual, I think, for centers, in that I am at the center where I found Science of Mind. And that doesn't usually happen, and there's good things about that. And there's some challenges to that as well, because I came up through the ranks. I was a volunteer, like I did tons of things and never got paid for it. And all of a sudden, I'm the only one in the center that's getting paid. So that's a whole mind thing. So I thought, when I come in, I'm going to do all of these changes, and, it's just marketing, and it's this and it's that, and this community is going to be booming. And those things didn't happen either. And along the way, I was introduced to this idea of peace building. And I met a woman who's now become a really wonderful and dear friend and mentor and, spiritual mama for me. And her name is Heart Phoenix. And her son was the actor River Phoenix. And they live the next town. Like, I'm in Ocala, Gainesville. It's 45 minutes from here. And we met at a party or something through mutual friends. And so we go to lunch, and I tell her about what I do as the, director of the spiritual center. And she says, well, why do you have a spiritual center? Why don't you have a peace building center? Well, tell me what a peace building center is. So she did, and I did a workshop. Again, I do everything big, right? Like, I have to do a deep dive. The first training I did with River Phoenix Center was, I think it was an 8-day immersive experience using peace building principles, which I call, peace literacy. Essentially, it's social emotional learning and conflict resolution, and the things that you'll see that are on that website. And so I took a deep dive. I did have another. It didn't stop with the business, right? When I told you I had my own business, at a point, I think 11 years into publishing Family Times magazine, I left that business, and I went back into social services and worked for another agency that was, under the state, where kids who were abused and neglected, like, they do the investigation and they figure out what services those families need. So I was working for an agency that was providing services for our community, which was doing training for folks in all different walks of life, but teaching people what to do in real time when you're in the grocery store and somebody is beating the crap out of their kid, or you're worried that the neighbors are abusing their children or whatever. I would teach ways to prevent things from happening, or teach people how to intervene safely so that they're better off and the children are better off. And so I went from writing for a living then to now speaking for a living, which was all great, because I'm also on track now to be a minister.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm working my way to that, and thought, well, this will fine tune my presenting skills and my, workshops and things like that. So anyway, I have all of that background now. I meet Heart Phoenix. I do this workshop with her in that community. And at the end of the workshop, they said, what would be easy for you to do? What would be a stretch? and what would be like over the moon amazing for you to do with what we've taught you in this workshop, right? So easy breezy. I could take the curriculum that they gave us in this workshop and I could teach it to men at the prison where I was volunteering. Right. I had a group of like 25 guys. We were part of a Toastmaster group that went in. That's another whole story. But anyway, I'm volunteering at a prison and I'm going in like me by myself, right, with a group of 25 guys sitting in circle, and I'm teaching them science of mind, although I'm not calling it that. We call it personal development. And now I have this other thing that I can add to it with the peace building and some real practical stuff for them in conflict resolution and whatnot. And so that would be easy. Let me teach that at the prison. A stretch would be to share these principles with my center and with Centers for Spiritual Living. And then over the moon would be to have a peace building center in Ocala. Like that would be incredible, right? So the class I was teaching them was, again, the social emotional learning. At the end of this class, there was what they called the teach back. So the guys would take what I taught them and teach it back to a group. So the 12 weeks or however long we were together, take that stuff, distill it, and then share it in a 2-hour block of time. And I invited Hart and her husband, Jeffrey, who's the executive director of our Phoenix Center, to come for that teach back. And they blew us all away. The guys were just amazing. It was incredible. They had prison administrators. There was, 100 other of their peers. And it was super cool. So same time, right? I'm still in the pulpit here at CSL Ocala. Finances aren't great. I hadn't been paid in like 6 months, which, I was a volunteer for years and didn't get paid. So it wasn't, I was kind of used to it, but at the same time, like I need to work for a living. I got to bring in some money. So it was right after the Big Sky retreat. I worked up the courage, came back from Big Sky, stood in the pulpit on a Sunday morning and said, I just have to let you know what's going on here. I can't afford to keep doing this and not get paid. I'm going to drop back to part-time. And I don't even know what that looks like. And I don't want anyone in this community feeling guilty, bad, none of that. I just know that God provides, Spirit provides. I know I'm going to be okay. But this is what it's going to be. That evening, that Sunday evening, I get a call from Hart and Jeffrey, and they said, our program director is leaving. She put in her notice. We know that we love what you've done with our work, and we'd love to offer you, position. We know you're super busy, so if you can't do it, would you maybe refer somebody else? And I was like, well, as a matter of fact, I do have the time. It's just like, wow, how Spirit showed up for me in that moment. And so I went to work for River Phoenix Center on a part-time basis as I was working, at CSL and learning the ins and outs of doing the peace building work and teaching that. And it has been integrated now into everything that I do. I'm a walking circle. So yeah, fast forward then to the 2020 and the pandemic. We were still doing the work at the prison, still doing all of these different things. Well, all of that came to a halt. And my ministry was then online. We were doing podcasting right here, just like we're doing now. And as we were talking about coming back, I thought, I don't want to do church the same old way. I don't want to do that. I have felt often that I was more invested in people's spiritual growth than they were. Like they're coming in for the show, they'll sit back and get the goodies and then go on their way. And, it's like, I don't want to do that anymore. I want to work with people who are really, number one, invested in themselves, but also invested in making our community better. I think sometimes in New Thought, we get really me, which there is that piece, right? But there's also the piece about community. So we made a very conscious decision when we came back, and we were on the, we were like financially again, like, just on a precipice a little bit. So it was like, we'll see what happens with this, and it'll take off or it won't. But when we came back, made that decision to do things differently. So every week is a different kind of focus. The first week of the month is its spiritual practice. So either myself or someone from our community will do something, which this is stuff we've always done, but not on Sunday morning. So let's do a visioning workshop, or let's do a feng shui workshop, or let's do a drum circle, but it's a practice and people are immersed and involved. Second Sunday is our more traditional, where myself or someone will do a talk. It feels more like church. Third Sunday, we do circle conversations. So we take the topic of the month, and I do a short overview, and then we break out into small groups and we do the questions, circle prompt, and everybody answers the questions. And then the fourth Sunday, our focus is on building the beloved community. So that could be something, sometimes it's an interview. It could be that we watch a TED Talk together or something, but the focus is always, how do we get along better as community? How do we make decisions as community? Because the hierarchy doesn't work for me. Never has. I don't ever want to be that talking head in the front of the room, or for people to put me on a pedestal or think that I've got something they don't have. I'm a facilitator at heart, and what I try to do is create the space for people to find themselves and to be the best version of themselves that they can be. So everything is around circle. And then, of course, the conflict resolution piece of it. Like, okay, now something has happened. How do we come back into relationship? How do we come back better, stronger? And that's part of, what I've been learning and teaching through River Phoenix Center.
Yeah.
And I still work with them.
Oh, okay. Well,
I
that
do.
sounds like an amazing transformation your center has gone through, you've gone through. How many years is it since the pandemic? So it's been about 5 years now that you've been doing it this way. And what do you see? And also, can you share a little bit about these peacekeeper principles or peacemaker? I'm sorry if I'm not getting the right
that's
word.
okay. It's language that's not really out there yet, but everything revolves around bringing people together in circle. And so circle, there's a lot of reasons for having a circle, right? Everyone is equal and everyone is seen. You can't hide in a circle, right? And so when there is a conflict, what we do, bring people together in a restorative circle. And this, let me tell you, this works in kindergarten classrooms. Like, kids can do this, right? I do this in my home. The guys in prison are doing this. And this can be done very informally. I mean, all the way to formally, where there's contracts and things like that people are filling out. But it comes down to 4 basic questions, right? Number 1, what happened? Right? You bring people into a space, and, say there's an accident or something happens, and you have your perspective because you were standing over there and saw it. This person back here has another angle on it, and everybody has a different perspective and maybe a different point of view. So even that question can be very enlightening for people, right? To see. It's like having a 360 camera in the midst of an event. Number 1, what happened? Number 2, what was the impact? So how did this affect you? Now, let me back up, because a prerequisite for bringing people into the circle is that everyone wants to make the relationship better. You never bring people into the circle that are not willing to take accountability, that are thinking they're going to tell somebody off or put somebody in their place or whatever. It's not about that. It's really about, this relationship is important for us. And so what can we do to restore, right? So you have the person who caused the harm, the person who was harmed, and maybe helpers or witnesses or, support people to be in that circle, right? So again, what happened? What was the impact? So when people start speaking about how this hurt, how this thing affected me, people's hearts start kind of, you're opening up a little bit, right? The next question is, what do we need to do to fix it? How do we make this better?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a brainstorming session, among everybody in the group. And one person speaks at a time, and then the last question is, well, how do we keep this from happening again? That's it.
Gosh, that's so simple, but so precise and so, restorative, and helping people to really hear, opening up that space or that circle to be able to listen, and really listen to each other and to work together to come up with some ideas. That's beautiful.
It really is. And it doesn't work all the time, right? Let me say that. And the skill, I think, is being able to create that space. I mean, I have been in circles myself where I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I say? How do I bring this back in? And I just, but always the prayer, is that the answers are in the circle. I don't have to have all the answers. I know that I don't. I know that spirit is showing up. So that's what I bring to the table, is that understanding and that awareness and that perspective that we all have our own solutions. My tasks, right? My job is to create a safe space so that people can find their solutions. And sometimes they're duking it out. Sometimes this work is not for everybody to do, because you have to be able to hold that, the discomfort of being with people when they're, when they're rumbling it out.
Yeah, I would imagine that all that your life experience has really given you a great deal of insight into when there is conflict, let's say in a circle such as we're talking about, that you're able to see, some of the root causes, or, get a sense of them, as people show up unable to really, maybe haven't processed their trauma, and they show up in a very reactive way, even though they have a desire to get to peace, or do something to bring peace. There's still all of that bubbles up when we're in those kinds of situations that push our buttons or touch those sensitive spots. And you are someone that's been so tuned in over the course of your lifetime with your own family of origin, with the foster kids and all the work you've done. You've got such a big heart and such a clear desire to create peace, that your consciousness, when you said, well, sometimes I don't know what to do or what to say, but just you holding that space and being the anchor, and the leader of your spiritual community in this process, this technique that you're sharing with us. I can see why you have been invited into so many different circles, why you've given that TED talk. You really do have the consciousness that this world needs now, because peace really is what we're seeing as something that we all need to cultivate in our own lives, in our own minds, and in our communities. So we're right at the end. You've got like 1 minute. How can people get in touch with you? And I could just go on talking to you forever here.
Oh my gosh. Reach out to me at cslocala.org or circleupcenter.org. The thing I just really want to say is that we in New Thought come from this awareness and a perspective of oneness, right? We're not here to convert people. We're not here to change people. I think that we are the natural peace builders of the world. And what I want to do is teach people in our spiritual communities how to hold that space for folks when they're going through it, and holding that truth that we all get to recognize and experience that oneness. Circles are magical. It is like magic when they work and you see yourself in another person's life and experience. And so I just invite that, and I love to do trainings. So call me.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching today. Outreach to Cindy if she stirs up something in your heart. And we'll see you next Monday. Bye-bye.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth. To live a conscious life, to live a conscious life on the growing edge.